In the shadowed corridors of power where empires once thrived, a single administrative misstep could unravel centuries of order, turning the machinery of civilization into the engine of its own undoing. Picture the year 376 AD, when the vast Roman Empire, stretching from the misty highlands of Britain to the sun-baked deserts of North Africa, stood as the unchallenged colossus of the known world. Yet beneath the marble facades and disciplined legions, cracks were forming in the bureaucratic foundations that had sustained it for generations. The collapse did not begin with the thunder of barbarian hordes at the gates. It began quietly in the dim offices of provincial governors and tax collectors, where ink-stained scrolls recorded decisions that would echo through history like distant thunder. No one understood what was coming next, as the intricate web of Roman administration, once a model of efficiency, started to fray under the weight of its own complexity and human frailty. The Roman Empire at its zenith represented the pinnacle of organized human endeavor, a sprawling domain governed by an elaborate system of laws, taxation, and provincial oversight that funneled resources from every corner to the eternal city. Roads carved through forests and mountains carried not just soldiers and merchants, but the lifeblood of imperial control, while aqueducts whispered with the steady flow of water that nourished bustling metropolises. In the forums of Rome and Constantinople, senators debated policy amid the scent of incense and the murmur of crowds, their voices carrying the weight of decisions affecting millions. Daily life pulsed with routine precision. Farmers in Gaul tilled fields under the watchful eye of local magistrates. Artisans in Alexandria crafted goods for distant markets, and legions patrolled frontiers where the empire's boundaries met the unknown. The air hummed with the rhythm of markets, the clatter of carts on stone pavements, and the solemn chants from temples dedicated to gods who seemed to bless this enduring order. Yet this world of structured prosperity masked vulnerabilities that administrative failures would soon expose. Before the visible fractures appeared, Romans went about their lives with the quiet confidence born of centuries of stability. In the provinces, families gathered for evening meals under oil lamps, sharing stories of ancestors who had built this mighty edifice. Children learned Latin and the virtues of duty in schools funded by civic benefactors, while merchants negotiated contracts enforced by imperial edicts. The scent of baked bread mingled with the earthy aroma of olive groves in Hispania, and in the east, silk traders from distant China haggled in bazaars protected by Roman law. This daily rhythm felt eternal, a carefully administered harmony where bureaucracy ensured grain shipments arrived on time to prevent famine, and military payrolls kept loyalty intact. Silence in the record halls of governors spoke of meticulous documentation, yet few noticed how these routines depended on an increasingly strained administrative backbone, one that had grown bloated with layers of officials more interested in personal gain than imperial welfare. Early warning signs emerged like faint tremors beneath the surface, invisible to most, but detectable in the ledgers of far-flung provinces. Corruption seeped into the tax collection system, where local administrators, burdened by unrealistic quotas from Rome, turned to extortion and falsified records to meet demands. Inflation gnawed at the economy as emperors debased the currency, mixing silver with cheaper metals, causing prices to spiral in marketplaces from Gaul to Syria. By the time the signs became clear, it was already too late for many. Provincial reports of depleted treasuries and neglected infrastructure gathered dust in imperial archives. The vast network of roads began showing signs of disrepair. Bridges cracked under infrequent maintenance, and border forts stood undermanned because payroll funds had vanished into the pockets of corrupt officials. No one fully grasped how these administrative lapses, small at first, were eroding the empire's ability to respond to external pressures, as the machinery of governance ground slowly toward dysfunction. As the 4th century progressed, rising tension gripped the empire like an invisible vice. Barbarian tribes pressed against the Danube frontier, their movements driven by their own migrations, but Roman responses were hampered by bureaucratic paralysis. Governors in distant provinces awaited approvals from Constantinople that arrived too late if at all, while central authorities grappled with conflicting reports filtered through self-serving intermediaries. Instability mounted in the cities, where food shortages sparked murmurs of discontent among the plebs, their voices rising in the shadows of once grand basilicas. The silence of empty granaries contrasted with the frantic scratching of quills as clerks attempted to reconcile impossible accounts. Administrative overload meant that vital military reinforcements were delayed. Decisions on alliances with frontier peoples mired in endless correspondence, and the empire's once responsive system began to fracture under the pressure of over-centralization and under-enforcement. The collapse did not announce itself with fanfare. It whispered through misfiled decrees and ignored pleas from the edges of civilization. Key decisions and critical mistakes accelerated the descent, born from the administrative hubris of leaders attempting to hold together a domain too vast for its decaying structures. Emperors like Valens faced impossible choices, pressured by a bloated bureaucracy that prioritized short-term revenue over long-term stability. Heavy taxation to fund endless military campaigns drained provincial resources, driving farmers into debt and banditry as tax farmers exploited their positions with impunity. Attempts at reform, such as dividing the empire into eastern and western halves, created new layers of administration that duplicated efforts and fostered rivalry rather than coordination. In the quiet chambers of power, advisors weighed options amid the flickering light of candles, unaware that their incremental errors, neglecting frontier defenses, failing to integrate allied tribes effectively, and allowing corruption to fester, were compounding into systemic failure. These pressures mounted relentlessly as the empire's administrative core, once its greatest strength, transformed into a source of paralysis and internal betrayal. The moment the system began to fail arrived not with a single cataclysm, but through a cascade of breakdowns that exposed the fragility of imperial administration. In 376 AD, the Visigoths, fleeing the Huns, sought refuge within Roman borders, a decision approved by overwhelmed officials who saw opportunity in new recruits, but underestimated the logistical nightmare. Poorly managed resettlement led to famine and resentment among the migrants, whose desperation turned to open revolt. Roman commanders, hampered by contradictory orders from distant capitals and supply lines crippled by corrupt quartermasters, met the Goths at Adrianople in 378 AD. The devastating defeat, where Emperor Valens perished amid the chaos, revealed how administrative failures had left legions understrength and uncoordinated. Smoke rose from burning fields as communication lags and resource misallocations turned potential containment into irreversible rupture. By then, the quiet erosion had become a visible chasm, with provinces left to fend for themselves as central authority faltered. Human consequences unfolded in waves of social breakdown that transformed the empire's once ordered world into landscapes of fear and fragmentation. Refugees clogged roads once patrolled by legionaries, their faces etched with exhaustion as they fled marauding bands. In the cities, bread riots erupted under the harsh sun, the cries of the hungry echoing through forums where silence had once signified stability. Families watched as inflation rendered savings worthless, forcing the sale of ancestral lands to opportunistic officials. The decay was palpable, the stench of uncollected waste in neglected streets, the creak of abandoned farm tools rusting in fallow fields, and the distant clamor of battles that imperial bureaucracy could no longer prevent or resolve. Trust in authority evaporated as governors prioritized personal survival over public welfare, leading to localized warlords and fragmented loyalties. The social fabric, woven tightly by administrative order for centuries, unraveled thread by thread, leaving ordinary Romans to navigate a world where routine had given way to survival. In the aftermath, long-term historical impacts reshaped the trajectory of Western civilization in profound and enduring ways. The administrative vacuum created by Rome's decline allowed feudal structures to emerge across Europe, as local strongmen filled the void left by a collapsed central bureaucracy. Knowledge preserved in monastic scriptoria kept fragments of Roman law and engineering alive amid the ruins, influencing the slow rebirth of governance centuries later. The division between East and West hardened, with Byzantium enduring longer on more efficient administrative foundations, while the West descended into the early Middle Ages. Trade routes withered, cities shrank into fortified outposts, and the loss of centralized taxation and record-keeping meant centuries of lost economic complexity. These failures echoed through time, serving as cautionary blueprints for later empires, demonstrating how unchecked bureaucratic decay could precipitate the fall of even the mightiest powers and force humanity to rebuild from scattered remnants. Yet as the dust settled over the broken columns of once glorious forums, a haunting reflection lingered on the nature of human endeavors. The Roman collapse through administrative failures was not the end of history, but a stark reminder of how the invisible scaffolding of governance, when weakened by neglect and self-interest. In the quiet ruins where wind whispered through empty arches, one could almost hear the faint echoes of scribes and governors, whose small decisions accumulated into catastrophe. The empire's fall reshaped maps, languages, and societies, proving that chaos often follows not from dramatic invasions alone, but from the slow rot within systems meant to endure. And in that silence, the lesson remains. Civilizations rise on the strength of their administration, and they fall when that strength is squandered, leaving future generations to ponder what might have been, if only the warnings had been heeded before it was too late. The ghosts of Rome continue to watch over our own fragile orders, a spectral warning etched into the stones of history.